So today we're going to be learning how to make these rag rug baubles here, which are perfect for the Christmas tree. So when I was younger, I used to have a family cat who was a little bit mischievous, and he used to bat the baubles off the bottom of the Christmas tree. Hence the rag rug bauble was born, something that was completely indestructible, easy to make, and really jolly for around Christmas time. So the first thing that you need to do is you need to cut out your rag rug bauble template, which looks vaguely like a figure of 8. So I'm just going to cut that out now. So once you've got your kind of figure of 8 template out, that's when you get your Hessian. So once again, I'm using my kind of preferred weave of Hessian, which is fairly tight. You can go a little bit looser than this, but obviously kind of use whatever you prefer to. So right now, I'm just going to align the template. And you don't need to kind of stick it or anything, but if it's kind of moving around, you can pin it down. And you want to leave about 5 centimeters between where you've sketched your kind of template out and the edge of the Hessian, just so you're not kind of rag rugging too close to the edge. So at this stage, you would normally set your sewing machine to a zigzag stitch. Put your stitch width to the widest possible setting on your sewing machine. So mine goes to about a 6.0, but go to whatever you can. And you leave the stitch length at its default. So I think mine's 1.5 or 2. And at this stage, you then sew around the black line, around the kind of figure of 8 template. And I normally stitch twice around the figure of 8 on top of each other with this zigzag stitch, just to make sure that the stitch is very, very firm and nothing's going to kind of fall apart. Once you've done this, your Hessian is absolutely perfect and ready to do your rag rugging. However, first you need to prepare your fabric. So I've prepared some long strips of this very, very natty patterned fabric here. However, for the shaggy type of rag rugging, which we're going to be doing for our baubles, you need to transform these long strips of fabric into short pieces between kind of 5 and 7 centimeters long to create your baubles. So this is where this wonderful tool called a gauge comes in. So I've cut my long strips. I'm then going to grab probably 5 strips. And it doesn't matter if the lengths are all different. It doesn't matter if they're a little bit wonky, but basically you want the ends to align at the top. So I've got a good mixture of different lengths here, as you can see. You then take your gauge, align the tops of the strips with one end of the gauge and near this groove at the top. You then wind gently along and around the gauge. And if there are any short strips, you just kind of trap them into the gauge so they're not kind of hanging loose. Once you've kind of wrapped them around, you take your fabric scissors, and this is a very satisfying bit, you cut down the groove, and you'll end up with a pile of similar length pieces of fabric for kind of doing your shaggy rag rugging. So I'll just put them aside and pop these here. So once you've prepared your short strips, it's onto the rag rugging itself. So as I said, we're doing shaggy rag rugging, which consists of lots of short pieces of fabric being kind of woven through this Hessian backing. And we're using this tool called a latch hook, which is kind of my preferred tool for doing it. So you always hold your fabric underneath the Hessian when you're doing this. And we want to be rag rugging just on the inside of this figure of 8 kind of stitching here. And you want to keep as close as possible to that, just so you can hide any of it. I've used a similar colour thread to the Hessian, just so if anything does kind of go slightly astray, it's still not going to be very obvious. So putting my hook into the Hessian, I'm now hooking onto the strip behind and just pulling one end of the strip up through the Hessian, then onto the next kind of diagonal hole and just pulling very simply the end through to the top. And at the moment it looks very flat because it hasn't got any neighbours kind of propping it up, but you then take your next strip, very simply repeat the action to rag rug your next piece into the next hole. So you've got 2 ends going. You keep repeating this around the edge of the figure of 8, keeping nice and close to the stitching until you've gone all the way around. And you just want to pay particular care when you get to this central bit here. You just want to make sure that you join up the figure of 8 in the middle. So you want to make sure you've got a few pieces kind of going along the central bar, just like this. Once you've finished going around the entirety of the figure of 8, you will end up with something that looks like this. And don't be alarmed at this stage if you can't kind of, it looks like you've covered the entire thing. If you look from the back, you can see that actually you've got quite a lot of space in the middle. You've joined up the figure of 8 in the middle, and it looks like a nice number 8 there. At this stage, it's when you change to your other colour. So I'm going to use these beautiful kind of sweet wrappers from some toffees that I enjoyed the other day, just for a little bit of kind of festive glitter and glamour in my bauble. So what you want to do now, it becomes a little bit harder to rag in the centre, but do persevere. I'm using these sweet wrappers just for a little bit of glitz and glamour for my kind of Christmas baubles. So exactly the same technique as before. You're inserting your hook from the front, hooking on from the back, pulling one end up to the top. So I've got one end pointing up, just going into a neighbouring hole. Once again, hooking onto the other end and just pulling the other end up, so you've got a kind of both ends pointing upwards. So once you've fully rag-rugged the centres of your figure 8, you'll end up with what looks like this. So from the back you can see a lot of the kind of holes in the centre are kind of full. It's at this stage that you want to cut out your figure of 8. And this can be a little bit tricky because some people have a tendency to accidentally cut some of the kind of fabric pieces, so just watch out of that. I tend to cut mine from the back of the Hessian and hold all of my pieces as I kind of cut it. So I'm going to use my everyday scissors now to cut around the figure of 8. And as you can see, I'm just kind of holding the pieces out of the way from the front. So here we go. So the whole theory of the bauble is now we're just going to attach it together to create this kind of lovely double-sided kind of bauble with lots of kind of, frilly edges to it. But obviously it's very handy to be able to hang your bauble up. So we're first going to create this little tie loop just so they can be hung. And because of the kind of ethos of rag rigging, we're going to use the kind of Hessian base to do this, but you can obviously use ribbon, you can use any kind of tie that you particularly would like. So here you can just see I've got a bit of loose Hessian that hasn't been hemmed, and these little pieces of kind of, Hessian strands come off it. So I've just taken one of these Hessian strands. I'm going to divide it into 3, just cut it into 3 roughly equal sized pieces, doesn't matter too much. I'm going to knot the top of them, and you don't need to be too careful about this. So just tying it in a knot, and then you want to almost just plait them together. And I've already done that, so here is my my plaited Hessian. And as you can see, the ends are a little bit kind of messy, so I'm just going to kind of cut a little bit off here, just to tidy things up slightly. So when you kind of hoop this round, it's a perfect tie for my bauble. So what you want to do now, I've been preheating my kind of glue gun here. If you're doing this craft with children, obviously be careful and don't let them do the glue gunning. So what you want to do now is just put a little blob of glue in the kind of centre of your bauble and just press your kind of loop into it. And then putting more glue all around the edge of one of the kind of halves, some in the middle. I'm just going to very simply sandwich our figure of 8 together and just very kind of firmly press it together. And you want to just make sure that none of those kind of edges are visible and that all of your kind of shaggy bits are kind of covering it all. And then you've got your loop. And there you have one jolly finished Christmas bauble for the tree. And obviously you can do it in any pattern under the sun. You can use whatever material fancy and it'll all look lovely. Thank you very much for watching. My name's Elspeth Jackson, and if you'd like to see any other rag rug projects, you can check out my book, Rag Rugs, Pillows and More. Happy rag rugging, guys!